It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command Podcast. I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulsen. He played 10 years in the NFL. I covered it for 5 and now host a daily radio show, the Hoffman Show, on the Team 980. Logan, another offseason mailbag, in part because we had a whole bag of questions that we didn't even see last time we did a mailbag. I put together a post on YouTube and then saw all your replies afterwards. So this is a YouTube only in terms of where the questions came from mailbag. And we got some good ones, Logan. I'm excited to dive into these.
Yeah, we kind of were previewing them. They all sounded like they're really going to be a lot of fun to talk about. So looking forward to it.
This is like a classic sports radio podcast type of discussion here, but it's also kind of what the Commanders have to do when they put together their board. This one from Nathaniel. We always love a good Nathaniel. He's not Nate. He's full on Nathaniel. If you had to rank re-signing or extending our current players, what would be the top 5? His is Payne, Curl, Holcomb, Gibson, question mark. That question mark could be filled with a couple of guys we can get to in a second. But if you had to rank re-signing or extending that group of either pending free agent or, in Curl's case, extension eligible, Gibson as well, extension eligible players, how would you go about ranking them, and what would ultimately be your rankings?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it goes Payne, Cam, Curl, just kind of they're the definitive number 1 and number 2. And obviously we've talked about Payne a lot on this podcast, but I do think when you're talking about Curl specifically, and you are a huge fan of Curl as I am, he is a guy that is extremely talented, and his talent shows up in a very unique way. Obviously, it's kind of like this manager, playmaker kind of slash. He's not like this crazy freak like Ed Reed was, but he does seem to elevate, Derek Forrest, does seem to elevate Bobby McCain when he's out there. And I'm not exactly sure as to why that is. Fred Smoot says he's a great communicator, and I'm going to defer to Smoot on that because I think they've had conversations. But to me, like, the proof is in the pudding. The defense does not play as well when he's not in there. And so obviously Cole would be the third guy. And I think Cole is interesting because I think you could get him probably pretty cheap, and I think
the injury helps.
Yes.
Last year
not
in terms
him.
of that.
Doesn't help him.
Yeah, it helps. It hurts him. It helps the team get him back for cheaper.
Right. And so I think that's one that you kind of say, well, maybe we'll be able to get him on vet minimum or slightly plus vet minimum. And that, again, you need linebackers. I do get a vibe, again, like this is all good. I haven't talked to anybody in the building about this, that they're probably going to look at one of the linebackers in the draft this year. And they have some guys who I think could be nice fill-ins, and you could probably get them in the 4th, 5th round. So, I haven't finalized my evaluation on the linebacker, but just kind of early stuff. Like, they might be looking to get younger, might be looking to let Jamin step in a larger role. I don't know. That's just something interesting to kind of keep an eye on. And then Gibson is interesting too. I think they like Gibson. I know they like Gibson. It's just about, what that number looks like and, based on his production and his health. And obviously I think the word on the street is that they're going to look for a third back in the draft. What type of runner is he? What type of pass catcher is he? Does that affect Gibson's ability to play, and do you feel like you need to extend him this year if he's going to get even less touches going into 2023?
So I have a 5th name that I will throw in this that actually is going to go 3rd on my list in just a second. But first, on Holcomb, what position is Jamin playing next year? Because if they want to slot Jamin in at Mike, you can move on from Cole, or you could play Cole at the will. I don't know how that dynamic would go. Like, Cole's more of a natural Mike, the guy who they trusted with that communication and everything for a reason last year. But Jamin filled in that role, and I know he didn't initially have the green dot, but I'm pretty sure he did by the end of the season. They transferred that over, and he was playing the role in full. So, if Jamin's your Mike, can you find another will in the draft that's better? And, like, Cole becomes a depth player almost next year too. Like, I'm not saying they shouldn't re-sign him, and he's not a really valuable guy to have, but he isn't, like, to me, he's a guy that if you lose him, like, he's somewhat easily replaceable, which says more about the linebacker position than Cole. I'm not trying to say that Cole's not a good football player, but the nature of linebacker has been de-emphasized in the league to an extent that I just don't know. Like, is it even worth a vet minimum when you could pay a rookie salary at that position if Jamin's your bona fide starter? Like, that's kind of what I'm saying.
No, I totally get that, and I think when you look at Jamin, especially into the second half of the year, he just because he's a longer, I think he plays stronger than Cole inside. He's just a little bit more dynamic on the inside, and I think when you look at the college football landscape at the moment, kind of with these spread offenses and these star diamond overhang to the field linebackers that are becoming so popular, like it's a little bit easier to find a will because, like, quite frankly, that's what Jamin played, that's what Cole played. And so when you look at Cole, he's probably more comfortable playing Will. And I think Cole is a very good football player, but I do think there is kind of a surplus of those like big safety, small linebacker, overhang Will players that are going to run really fast. Like one of them that really sticks out to me is like I think his name is Dylan Henley from Washington State. He was a quarterback that converted to safety, that converted to linebacker, and his tape at Washington State this year was absolutely so fun to watch because he's fast, he's physical. To me, he's like that perfect, like he's a perfect linebacker. Now, you know, he's an example of a guy that kind of fits this more modern mold. But, you know, is he a guy that you value enough to pick in the third round, you know, with that comp pick that you get from Brandon Sheriff? So I do think that is a compelling decision. And obviously, you know, money talks, and that decision I think is going to be super predicated on, you know, how, you know, the number Cole is looking to get. And I think, like you said, I think his value here is probably a little bit higher than like around the league, for example. But, you know, if the price is right, bring him back. And if you don't feel like the price fits your long team building strategy, and something that really affects that is Payne's contract, you know, and what they're able to do with Payne. So in terms of replacing Cole, finding an auxiliary piece, I think the draft this year probably affords you that opportunity. But, you know, I think Cole is a good football player, and if you can get him back, get him back.
Yeah, definitely. He's a guy to that, like he's an NFL starter.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, it might not be in his best interest to come back if they're going to be like, hey, we're going to start Jamin and probably draft a rookie that we want to start. Right. However, if you can have Cole as your starter, and then the rookie's got to beat him out, that's a good situation and worth paying probably a little bit more than the vet minimum for. Not to mention, like, Cole Holcomb would be a ridiculously good special teams player. At least absolutely. In theory. Like, he hasn't played a lot of teams because he's been starting most of his career, but like he's really fast and obviously a good tackler, a starting NFL linebacker caliber tackler.
He's physical.
So that physicality would be a good special teams boost if he winds up being your backup. Like, you need depth. And if Cole Holcomb's your depth player, you're doing really well at linebacker because he is not a high-end starter, but a bona fide starter in the league at either Mike or Will. Special teams, though, is where my other guy is. You know who else is a free agent? Jeremy Reeves.
Yeah.
Jeremy Reeves, to me, is that, you know, you rank your top 5. Payne's one. They got to figure out him in part because he's the biggest line item. Even if you think Curl is more valuable because Vaneri Mathis and you know those guys are in place at depth, and you know you think that Payne is ultimately a guy that's worth trading. Like, he's the biggest budget line item, so you have to do him first. Curl, MVP of the defense, arguably, like, incredible player. Very clear that he is worth it. He's the guy that's next. But Jeremy Reeves is your special teams captain. He was just named All-Pro, nevertheless Pro Bowler. He is incredible depth player that like can play some safety.
I was gonna say, showed he can play safety. That's a big deal. Obviously,
he provides you depth there at a position that you needed it last year. So I think that, you know, Reeves isn't a young player in that he's like, oh, he's a 22-year-old. Up and coming special teams ace now who's got great safety potential in the future. Like, he's never going to be a starting caliber NFL safety. He's 5-6 years into his career. Yeah. But he is the core of your special teams and a beloved guy in the locker room who's probably not going to cost that much money. Because at the end of the day, while he's an all-pro special teamer. Like, Matthew Slater was able to stay in New England all those years because they were like, yeah, this dude's important. We'll pay him what he's worth, but it's not like he's going to go out and break the market. Correct. So I think re-signing Reeves, I would put it 3. Gibson, I don't really care about extending. If it works out, great. But because he's a running back, and especially a running back who's been hurt, like, I don't know that there's a huge priority there.
Yeah, the name I wanted to bring up was like Bobby McCain would be someone that would be
Hmm.
kind of interesting. And the only reason I say that is people say, oh, he's not a true safety. But when he played nickel, he did a really good job. And so I know that you're looking for like this Buffalo nickel hybrid role. And there are a couple guys in the draft that I think, kind of fit that role. Like there's a kid from Illinois that did an excellent job at the Senior Bowl that really stuck out. Like there's a lot of guys like that because of the college game, right? They kind of bounce in between these different systems, and guys have to do a lot of stuff. Sidney Brown's his name. It took me a minute to figure it out. But, do you feel like you need to extend him? That's something that I would keep an eye on. But I do agree Reeves is like, he's your guy. If you can find a way to get him done. I do think it's important to kind of acknowledge that if they do sign Payne to a long-term deal, it's going to really affect their ability to keep Jeremy. Like that's what that big deal does, is it makes it really hard to extend Cam, makes it hard to keep kind of that working class, middle class of your roster when you have these huge financial commitments to guys.
This is also why who you sign and how much they cost at backup quarterback is a huge deal. If you pay Jacoby Brissett 10, and I'm just throwing out this number, right? But you can get Andy Dalton for 3. That's the difference in re-signing Reeves or not. Like
Correct.
that $7 million might be Reeves' number. It might actually be higher than his number. So that's another thing to consider as you move forward, is like, okay, how much we know that Sam Howell is QB1 and that rookie contract is going to buy us a bunch of dudes and a bunch of space, but who backs him up and how much that guy costs obviously matters a lot too. The other top free agents, here's the rest of the free agents. Schweitzer, Trey Turner, and if, just say, hey, I want to talk about that guy if I get to anybody that you want to talk about. Schweitzer seems like the guy who might be worth,
well, yeah, especially with like the flexibility inside that he
Right.
gives you. Good player, plays center, right? They don't have a center on the roster. Maybe that's the way you look at it. Maybe that's the guy you go with.
You want to know what's crazy? Trey Turner and Wes Schweitzer are the same age.
Are they really?
Yeah, Schweitzer, 29.4 years old. Trey Turner, 29.7 years old. I'm looking at the Spotrac numbers.
God.
That's crazy.
They feel so different in terms of age, don't they?
I would have sworn Turner was like 34.
Yeah, me too. But
Cam Sims is another interesting one in kind of the Jeremy Reeves camp. Depth, excellent special teams player, can play his offense position where Reeves can play his defense position. But Cam's a free agent. Heineke, obviously someone that probably should be honorable mention on the list as part of that quarterback equation. F.A. Obata.
That's a big deal. That is a huge deal. And I think, again, like FA just did such a good job last year of bouncing inside and outside. And, like there are some reports that they're looking to maybe draft a defensive lineman. Maybe they're going to wait on that to see if they can, again, if you draft a guy, you're keeping salary numbers down, right? So there is that incentive to get that done through the draft. This is a very edge heavy draft. So there's probably going to be an opportunity for that. But I think that's an absolute must. You need to find a guy who's got some pass rush juice. That's nothing against Casey. That's nothing against James. But FA did bring a lot in terms of being dynamic. And so either you need to replace him in the draft or you need to re-sign him. And I do think based on how he played last year, it's going to be a little bit too rich for them. I would assume.
He made 1.1 last year, 1.2 last year. Which is obviously not a lot, but he played well. He is also, though, 30. He'll be 31 by the time the season starts.
Yeah.
So a little bit of an older player, although he doesn't have the mileage on his legs because he got a little bit of a later start coming over from the UK. Tyler Larson will be 32 coming off injury. It's his centerpiece. David Mayo, John Bostic, Jonathan Williams, Nick Martin, Khaleke Hudson, Milo Eifler, Jarrett Patterson, Jeremy Reeves, Eli Wolf, Cole Holcomb, Rashad Wildgoose.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the name that sticks out there is F.A. and Wes, in addition to the names you already talked about. And Wes, just because he's a little bit younger. And again, they're going to look to draft an offensive lineman this year, specifically a center. So I
would be stunned if they didn't draft 3 offensive linemen this year.
Like they're going to make a move there. And so that's going to affect Wes's signing. So, I've had conversations with Wes. I've had conversations with guys like Boomy, right? And they're in a little bit of a holding pattern, the team, in talking with them. I haven't talked to anyone in the building about making some of these moves because they got to check out the free agent market and they got to make sure that, kind of flesh out their draft evaluation. And so if there's some movement on these signings, I think it'll show the team's kind of perspective on, the center class or the edge rusher class, right? So those are some kind of interesting points to kind of just keep an eye on over the next couple of weeks leading into the combine, leading into free agency.
Yeah. Next question comes from L33 Reacts. Would you rather tank next year with Howell or try and actually make a run with someone capable to run the offense of whoever is coming in to call plays? I will say that question is probably going to be violently met by a certain group of fans who think Sam Howell is the second coming of Tom Brady. Brady was drafted in the 6th round. It doesn't matter where a QB was drafted. Sam Howell's the best, whatever. Okay, so if we take that aside and recognize that Sam Howell could be very good, I doubt he's going to be Tom Brady because no one else has ever been. But if Sam could be good, but let's take it out of the context in which we normally talk about this, which is like the realistic constraints that are on Ron Rivera, new ownership coming in, pressure to win, all that kind of stuff. If we were the owners and we're looking at the long-term health of the franchise, right? We're someone who is not concerned about Ron Rivera's future. We are concerned about how quickly can the Washington Commanders win a Super Bowl. What would you do next year? Because I think that's a fascinating question.
That's the question. That's the question. What is the best way to get you to a Super Bowl roster? And so there's an optimistic perspective and there's a negative perspective. Okay. So I'm going to start with the optimistic perspective because I think that's something that they can actually do this year. One, you draft a center, right? Center, go out, draft a offensive tackle, move Sam Cosmi to guard, and you have Norwell and Chris Paul compete for that left guard spot. Leno, I know everyone wants to hate on him, but if you look at the tape, he was fine. It's passable. Yeah. That group gets a lot better. You have one of the best skill position groups in the NFL. You can kind of run the football, insulate him with a new run game coordinator, new offensive perspective. Don't lose the game. You get a little bit better on defense, drafting, Joey Porter Jr., Witherspoon in the first round, and you're set. And the team is now, I don't want to say a playoff caliber roster, but like look at the Chiefs, look at Philly. Like, what's the difference between those rosters and our roster? One is they had 2 good corners, Philly does, and they had an excellent offensive line. So can you get that group ready to go? And then all of a sudden, yes, you're in a position where, you trade Duran next year, you do something next year, you end up with more draft capital. You can kind of move around in the first round in terms of allocating trade value with some of these extra picks you're going to get, whatever, right? That's the very optimistic standard. And the reason it's optimistic is because linemen, they take a little bit of time, or they can take some time to develop. Usually rookie cornerbacks aren't, lighting the world on fire right out the gate. All of those things are important to kind of keep in mind, right? Is that scenario possible? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not. So the next question comes is Sam Howell your guy moving forward for the future? And let's just take this year's draft as an example. Like, if I could take Sam Howell or Bryce Young, I'm going to take Bryce Young. And the only way you get to have Bryce Young is if you are a bad football team. So I want to put myself in a position to get the best quarterback available. I want to put myself in a position to get Bryce Young. Now, it's important to acknowledge that Bryce Young might not be the first quarterback selected because everyone's got a little different flavor. A lot of teams like Will Levis, whatever. That's a conversation
Stroud,
for
whoever their guy is.
But I want to be in a position where I can make that move and kind of find my Trevor Lawrence to build around moving forward. Now, Trevor Lawrence is a very unique prospect, but that takes some time, right? One of the ways to do that is to get rid of good players for draft capital so that you can move up and make that selection. You don't necessarily have to be bad, but you have to give yourself some flexibility to get that done. And I look at Philadelphia, again, they've just been so good in terms of team building the last couple of years. They had that extra pick last year. They traded it for A.J. Brown. Like, that's what that draft capital allows you to do. It allows you to make those moves and do those kinds of things. And you get a quarterback on a 5-year deal who's going to be good. You can build the team out. Then that 4th, 5th year of his contract, you're making your Super Bowl push and you're ready to go. That is the kind of stereotypical way of getting it done. Everyone says to go out and spend a lot of money in free agency. Traditionally, you look at it, those teams don't do well long term. Build through the draft, find some key free agents here, and then just let it ride on that rookie quarterback deal. So do you need to be bad? Do you need to tank the season? No, but you definitely, if you're not going to do that, you definitely need to find a way to get some draft capital, some resource capital so that you can move up. And that could, everyone was talking about trading Montez Sweat a couple years ago to move from 2 to 1 for Joe Burrow, right? That's the kind of environment you're talking about, right? So that to me, that's how I would build a team. Now that's hard. You got to trust your evaluation. You got to trust your front office. You got to hit on a lot of picks. That's why it's tough to be good at football in the NFL. But that, I think, is the roadmap, the optimistic roadmap, and then the one that's probably a little bit more realistic.
Right. So if I'm like overlord owner and I'm not concerned about Ron Rivera's future or anyone else's future, but I'm the guy who buys the team and is implemented in March.
Yeah.
I let them ride out this year with Howell in the hopes that Sam is awesome. And if that's
Correct.
the case, then like sweet, we go into year 3 of him. And year 4 on his rookie deal, and maybe we can even get a bit of a bargain because he's a late round pick, an extension, whatever. After one good year, you can pay him, hey man, we'll pay you 30 or 28 or 25, and we think he's gonna be really good. As opposed to if he hit free agency in a couple of years, he gets 40. But the other thing here is like timing out the decision makers of what you just talked about, right? Like if it goes sideways, then I fire everybody next year. And I now get to start over. Like, 1, we have a good draft pick because it went sideways.
Yeah.
2, I have a new head coach. 3, I have a new GM. Like, all those people get to be in place, and we get to start from scratch and build kind of our 5-year plan. And I do want to emphasize this. I feel like we way too often, we media and folks around the league, throw out these like, oh, how are you going to be good for the next decade? You can't plan for 10 years in the NFL.
Yeah.
That's just not the way contracts work. That's not the way player development works. It's not the way any of this works. Like, no, the only way to be good for 10 years is drafting Patrick Mahomes and keeping him for 10 years. Like, there's just, and even around Patrick Mahomes,
or just making excellent picks every single year,
Sure,
which is why
sure.
that is not as sustainable. It becomes less sustainable, is what I'm saying.
Right,
So
but
there
even
are
then,
two
like
ways,
you need to have what team has been good for 10 years without a quarterback every year? Like Baltimore's probably the closest, but
Right.
even then, like they've had Lamar for most of it. And even
Seattle
before
was
that,
that way for a while.
they had Flacco, but they've had some down years in between. I mean, Pittsburgh is, they had Roethlisberger for most of it, and Tomlin's never finished under 500. So I guess there are a couple, but like they've also never been a Super Bowl contender in the last decade. Like the only way to be that is to have Brady or Mahomes or Manning or one of these like all-time Hall of Fame quarterbacks and lock them up on long-term deals, which are expensive and it gets hard to compete as those deals kick in. So that's kind of my thing is like you need to think about this in terms of a 5-year plan instead of a 10-year plan, right? We're not planning for 10 years down the road, but can we build up our ability to have draft capital over the next couple of years? So like if you wanted to tank, so to speak, which I think is also less of a big deal in the NFL than it is in say the NBA, because in the NBA you need one of the 7 best players in the sport or you don't have a chance. Like there's just no other way to compete. Like the Wizards, I had this big interview with Tommy Shepard and we got, into it about Wizards general manager Tommy Shepard, and it was like, well, how are you going to get out of the middle of the Eastern Conference? And he's like, well, we like our trio of guys. Their trio of guys doesn't include one of the 15 or 20 best players in the league. Nevertheless, one of the best 7. And the course of NBA history says you need one of those guys. You either need to be all in around a Giannis, a LeBron, a Steph Curry, or you need to be trying to tank basically to get one of those guys. The NFL is not like that. The NFL draft is more of a crapshoot. There's deeper talent. It's more of a team game because there's 11 guys on the field and not one of them can have, or, a quarterback can have outsized impact, but he's only on the field for half the time anyway because you have your defense as opposed to a 5-man game in basketball. So it's just a different team building strategy overall. And so I think it's worth taking a shot with this group and Howell in part because this group is good. Like they have a good roster. For as often as we look at Rivera and go like, hey, they've done a kind of a whatever job and, the front office is dissatisfying because they missed in a couple of key spots and made like their biggest decisions have been poor. Quarterback, William Jackson was their big free agent signing. Like they messed up the big ones, but they've quietly built good depth. And some of that is just keeping around what Kyle Smith and the previous front office did with your Montez, with Terry, with all those guys. They're too good to be bad. I guess is ultimately like where I land is unless they have catastrophic injury luck, they're going to win 6-7 games next year. almost no matter who's at quarterback. And people like to say like, oh, Heineke, that's why you should go with Taylor. He was 5-3-1, all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, that's the point. With Taylor Heineke, this roster is good enough to be over 500 for an extended stretch of the season. They're good in a lot of areas. And so unless you're going to, like you said, gut it. Like let's see what happens when you tag and trade Duran. You also trade Sweat or Young. You move on from whoever else on the offensive side. One of these skill players, you make a blockbuster deal that nobody sees coming. Like, unless you're going to tear it down and get that kind of draft capital, like, you might as well just see what you got. And if it goes badly, then you'll have the draft capital already. And you can kind of, I guess, hedge a little bit in between with a move around Payne, but and a trade for him. But I don't think you have to go so far in one direction to go all in at quarterback and like spend a lot of money there, or tearing it all the way down. I think you can ride the middle more on the way to building a team in the NFL.
Yeah, so what I will say is, like, I mentioned there was two strategies in my opinion. Like, there's the kind of optimistic one. You hit on 3 picks this year, the roster fleshes out, you make a push, right, around Sam Howell. I think you still do that. I think that's still the motivation. I think you still build the team around here, because it's not like you don't have this albatross of a quarterback contract like weighing you down, like that's not a thing for this team. So make those decisions, draft good football players, try to make a push with Sam Howell. That's excellent, right? If it doesn't go well, then I think you unfortunately, it's not tearing the whole thing down, but you need to find a way to get yourself in contention for a top pick in the draft, a top quarterback candidate, right?
Right.
And I think another thing about this year's draft that needs to be said is, like, I was listening to Mel Kiper's podcast recently, and one of the things he mentioned is he had a hard time filling out his top 80 prospects, which is a bad sign for like the health and wellness of the draft. So it's going to be a tough year for this staff to make that happen, right? Like, it's part of the deal, right? So it's going to be challenging this year. Maybe you hedge a little bit more for next year, whatever it is. But I think you still run that optimistic strategy. If it doesn't go well, I think you really need to think about getting that young quarterback on a good contract, what that's going to take. And like, I haven't been advocating that while Ron's been here, because I don't think that's the right solution. But I do think that's the right solution if you are a new owner coming in with a new head coach, to make a move, kind of stamp your identity on this thing, totally change the narrative here in Washington. And that doesn't need to be a total fire sale, but to move up the way that they're going to need to move up, because I don't think this team is a bad team. I think the roster's pretty good, right? But to move up the way they need to move up, they're going to need to move some big pieces around to get that done. And I think that's just part of the deal, And hopefully Sam Howell works out. Hopefully he shows enough, and that can be your piece. That can be your Jalen Hurts. But I just I keep going back to Philadelphia, because their last 4 years have been exquisite. They always hedged for the next year. They always made sure they had 2 first-round picks the following year. This year they have 2 first-round picks just in case they needed to trade up and get something done. Like, I think that's the kind of perspective you need to be taking here, just to say, we think Sam could be the guy, but if he's not, what does next year look like, and can we make a move to get that done? And so that's what I would say about the kind of this team building philosophy, is just put yourself in a position next year, whatever that looks like, trading players, acquiring draft capital, whatever, just in case Sam doesn't go. And then you can make some decisions because you have all these resources at your disposal.
Yeah, definitely. The last thing I'll say, too, that kind of brings us all together, what I was saying and what you were saying, too, though, is like hitting on the pick is the most important piece. It doesn't have to be, well, it's easier to hit on the pick when you know, like, hey, we're 1-1 overall and we're taking Trevor Lawrence. Like, that's a pretty easy one to hit on. Joe Burrow was an easy one for the Bengals to hit on. Mahomes went 11. Jalen goes in the second round. Like, it can be done in the NFL. We're like the stars in the NBA outsized go in the top 3 picks. It's certainly a bit of a crapshoot, and there are certain drafts where things get wild, and like, yeah, Giannis and Jokic go later. There's probably other things about like how they scout international players in the NBA that probably should be examined along those fronts, and the difficulty of it. But considering every NFL player comes from college football, like there's definitely like weird nuances that come with that as well, and comparing, a Big East player to an SEC player, and trying to get the competition levels and how that'll ultimately translate into traits and how all those things will translate. But you can with frequency get a star, especially not at quarterback, later in the first round, in the second round, whatever. You can get an all-pro guard in the second, third round. These things happen. Not to mention, sometimes you can get an all-pro quarterback in the second round. Like, you can get Jalen Hurts in the second round because weird stuff happens in the way quarterbacks develop, or is unpredictable. And it also depends on the system and the ecosystem in which they enter. Jalen Hurts going to Philly with the coaches he's had mattered. As opposed to other quarterbacks who have gone to bad places that it hasn't worked out. So that all plays into it, and is why you can split the middle a little bit and pick a place like the Commanders are at 16 and still potentially get a stud. All right, continuing on with the other questions. This one from Funbags. Says, could we play Jamin Davis at the nickel spot, or the Buffalo nickel spot? He has played safety in his career. He isn't terrible at coverage, and he's really good at blitzing off the edge. I honestly feel like that would have been a perfect spot for him. So we did the Jamin Micah Parsons role the other day. What about Jamin at Buffalo nickel?
So I actually talked to someone in the building about that. Just was like, hey, this was before last year's draft. It was a really long time ago, and that was like, could Jamin do it? I know you're looking for resources and everything, and what it came out basically was like they didn't feel at the time that he had good enough hips to play the position. What that means is, like, when you're playing that Buffalo nickel, you do have to carry number 2, who's usually a slot receiver, vertical, right? So Jamin obviously has the straight line speed to do that. And, I think he's really good out of a back pedal, attacking downhill. He showed a nice proclivity for that. He does a good job carrying 2 vertical in certain situations, but I don't know if you want him majoring in that necessarily, right? So, and a little bit just how he's built. He's a bigger guy. He's 6'3", almost 6'4". He's 245 pounds. There's a reason that, no nickel player looks like that, because they have to turn, flip their hips, open those hips, and carry that thing vertically, and then adjust the football in the air. So Leonard, he's a more linear athlete. So I don't think that translates necessarily the way people think it would. I thought maybe, right? But I think you're looking for a guy who's got DB hips and DB feet, quite frankly. And I think the physicality of the position is something that is overrated because of Landon Collins' role there. When you look at the Buffalo nickel, the nickels that have been successful there, it's Cam Curl, it's Bobby McCain, it's guys that are physical, but really the thing that they're prioritizing is the coverage ability, right? And so I don't think that Jamin necessarily has that in the bag at the moment, right? And that's not a knock against him. He's one of the most athletic linebackers in the NFL, but there's a reason that, Luke Kuechly doesn't play the Buffalo nickel spot, right? He's not athletic enough to do it, even though he's a tremendous athlete. So I just think that's part of it. It's just a different type of athleticism, a different skill set, and you're looking for a very specific body type and mover at that spot, and just Jamin isn't that guy. And I don't think he'll develop into that guy just because of the type of athlete that he is.
My question back to all these questioners is, why is everyone trying to move Jamin Davis? He was good last year.
I think,
he's growing into a good player, and where someone is drafted is relevant. The earlier they are drafted, the more you expect from them early on, as well as you expect a higher ceiling. That is how you become a top whatever pick. Aiden Hutchinson went 2 because he was going to come in day 1 and be awesome, and then he was going to grow into what they hope to be a Hall of Fame caliber player, but certainly a Pro Bowler, right? And sure enough, Aiden Hutchinson, while he had moments where he looked like a rookie this year for Detroit, also had moments where he looked like a future Hall of Famer. That dude is real good, which is why he went 2 overall. Jamin, as a first-round pick, was taken there because he has a high upside, and he was probably overdrafted because he wasn't ready to play immediately, which is something that was known because he barely played football in college. He played essentially 1 season. That said, the high upside thing is still relevant, and his development is still happening. And I just don't get the incessant need to move him when he's improved. I get it because first impressions matter a lot, and the first impression of his rookie season makes, I think, a lot of people think that he's not actually cut out to do this. He is. He's 6'4", he's 245, he's really fast, uses his arms well. He does all the things that you want in a linebacker, and he's gotten progressively better at them. So my response would be Sure, could you line him up outside in certain formations against certain personnel, and when you're in base, feel comfortable kicking him out into some space? Sure, but that's part of his responsibilities as a linebacker.
Right.
There's no reason to move him. Quit trying to move Jamin Davis.
I read that as like they see him as a good athlete, and he is a good athlete. He's a very explosive athlete, and they say, why can't we apply that athleticism to the Buffalo nickel role? And I think it's kind of, in a way, it's like an endorsement of Jamin, right? Oh, like we see this tremendous athlete, Micah Parsons. Why can't we use Jamin that same way? Oh, he runs a 4.4. Bobby McCain runs a 4.5. Why can't he play the Buffalo nickel, right? And I think it's more of a it's showing a optimism towards his athleticism. And all I would say, it's just they're different types of athletes. Micah Parsons is a different type of athlete than Jamin, and Jamin's a different type of athlete than most nickel players in the NFL. And there's a reason that nickel players look a specific way, right? They kind of are this, they're 190 pounds to 215 pounds on the heavy side. They're super quick. They're super fast. They're tough little bastards, because that's the type of body type that fits that most effectively, right? Even good safeties have a hard time playing nickel because of the demands of the coverage that you need to do there, right? So I think that's why finding a good nickel can be so challenging, because it is a very specific mindset and it's a very specific athlete. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, Jamin is a linebacker. And there's a reason he's a linebacker. There's a reason nickels don't play linebacker, right? So I think that's just something that fans need to understand. Like when you're watching the game, watch the nickel. Watch what they have to do. There's a lot of space. They have to do a lot in coverage. And the run stuff is secondary. And I know that everyone says, oh, the Buffalo nickel. When you look at the Buffalo nickel role, we've talked about this before, it literally is just the nickel spot.
Right.
And they just said Buffalo nickel so that Landon would go play basically in the box. It was a little bit of a
linebacker
scheme. Yes.
That tends to do a little bit more in coverage.
Correct.
Based off responsibilities.
Right.
That's all it is.
Right.
So it's taking your middle linebacker or your will linebacker and putting him at Sam.
Yeah.
So why would you do that? Because you need that other position filled too.
Yeah.
And maybe if you're, because guys get hurt and you're scrambling one day, sure, you could kick Jamin out there and be like, hey, Cole, you're playing Mike, and, Rookie, you're playing Will, and Jamin, you're all we got. Go out there and get him. But that just isn't necessary.
I think even on the roster, though, there's I'd say there's an advantage, honestly, to look at who they wanted to play nickel. Percy Butler is the guy they wanted to play nickel. He's uber twitchy,
right.
Uber long. He's different than Jamin, right? But that is more of a true nickel, right? There's a physicality, there's a twitch there. So even if you were in a pinch, I'd be like, hey, one of you safeties come down here and give it a shot. It's just a different type of athlete. And again, not a knock on Jamin. He's a good linebacker, not a good nickel. And that's how
right, which is fine because he's a linebacker.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing. It's okay, so then who plays linebacker because you've decided to kick him over? Someone who's worse at playing linebacker. It's not like that spot disappears and those responsibilities disappear.
Right.
All right. This question comes from me. And it's something that you and I talked about off the air. I talked about it on the radio show yesterday, but I wanted to get your take on this on the air as well. Derek Carr's released yesterday by the Raiders and now becomes a free agent. Should the Commanders be interested in Derek Carr? And then make sure before you answer this, you duck because people are throwing things at us.
Yeah. So I think, just as a good process standpoint, I'm going to go talk to Derek Carr. I'm going to talk to his agent. I'm going to see what he's looking to get on the market. And if it's a crazy number, I'm going to say, okay, well, we're not interested. But if he's oh yeah, I would be willing to take $33 million this year. He is a good quarterback. He's an excellent football player. He struggled a little bit last year, no doubt. But if you look at his 2022 tape, he's a top 10 player, and it's a different type of top 10 player than Carson Wentz, for example. And I know one of the things I've said on this podcast is that Derek Carr is wildly inconsistent year to year, especially with a new OC. That criticism is still 1,000% valid, but he is a good football player, smart, quick release, understands where the football needs to go. And I think he's a guy that could elevate this type of skill position player. Now, with anything in the NFL, the cost is something that becomes a factor. Because if Derek Carr says, yeah, I'll come here for $15 million, you jump on that it's, it's the best deal of all time because it is. But if he says, no, I'm really looking to be, one of those top 10 paid quarterbacks. I'm looking for about $41.5 million. and you say, that's not for us at this point in our franchise building process. So of course you're interested. You're interested in good football players. It's just about that cost to play relationship. It's the same thing that they ran into with Kirk Cousins. It's like, would you like to have Kirk Cousins? Yes. Do you think he's worth $28 million when he was making his deal? They didn't think that. And he got paid a lot of money to go play in Minnesota. So I just think that is kind of what you're always negotiating. Like, if I'm the GM, I'm calling Tom Brady's agent, even though he said he'd retired, just to see. I'm calling Aaron Rodgers just to see what the market is. I'm calling all of those teams to make sure that my evaluation and understanding of the market is complete. But if the price is wrong, which I'm assuming it's going to be, I'm not going to jump on it. It's not the right thing for me right now.
Do you have a number in mind before I give my 2 cents here? What's the number for Carr where you're like, and it could be a number that he's not interested in remotely, where you're like, hey, 50, if it's more than 15, like this just doesn't fit our budget.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like the budget. It's for them. I think the budget's probably, I think you'd be comfortable paying like 25 to 15 for him. And if you were to say like 30, I think I would even jump on that. Because think about this, just for context. The market for a quarterback is $40 million plus a year. So if he's taking 30, I'm thinking about it. Now, is it the right decision? I don't have to give up any draft capital. I don't have to do anything crazy because he's cut. So just me and him working out a deal, right? I'm going to think about it. Now I'm going to evaluate all my options. How much do I really like Sam Howell? Do I love that? No. But do I think it's an upgrade of what they've had over the last couple of years? Yes. And I know fans are freaking out. No more retreads, no more veteran retreads. But ultimately, like if I'm the GM, I'm interested in good football players. And I think he's a pretty good football player. And at $30 million, I think that is good value.
So I had Tashawn Reed, who is the Athletics beat reporter covering the Raiders on last week. And I said, should the Commanders have or be interested in Derek Carr?
Yes, quarterback is Sam Howell. Absolutely. what are we doing
of all
here?
The things you said, that's going to be the thing that's most controversial on my YouTube page, within my Twitter, everything. People love Sam Howell here.
Yes. I mean, I covered Florida State. He was once commit. So, like, nothing against Sam Howell. Like, his family, all the good people. Derek Carr is exponentially better than Sam Howell. The chance of Sam Howell becoming as good as Derek Carr probably pretty small. And if he does, he's probably not ready yet. Like, I know he had a couple of games at the end there, but come on now.
And while people are like, "Oh my God, Sam's amazing," like all that stuff, he's right.
Yes.
Like, if Sam Howell develops into Derek Carr, the
fired
Commanders have done an incredible job. And every bad thing you ever said about anybody who was involved in his drafting is vindicated, validated. Your criticism does not matter. They won the argument. Because if you get a guy who is going to multiple years be in the MVP conversation in the 5th round, you have done a miracle, or you have pulled off a miracle.
Yeah.
These things happen sometimes in the NFL, not very often. Like, it's Dak, it's Kirk. It's like, once every 5 years, a really high-end starter is like MVP level, is someone drafted 3rd round or later. Most of the quarterbacks in the NFL are
Russell
like,
Wilson.
and again, it happens because there's only 32 starting quarterbacks and there's only like 22 of them that are actually good. And so they come from a variety of places. But of that, let's say 22, 25, whatever the number is, half of them are 1st round guys.
Correct.
Like, they most often not only come 1st round, but like top 10.
Right.
You know, you can tell me Tom Brady, you can tell me Russell Wilson, you can tell me all these guys, and I'll be like, Burrow, Lawrence, like 1-1 overall.
Josh Allen
was, I think, 8th.
But like Lamar Jackson, like they're all 1st round players.
Right. Even Lamar, who's like, oh my God, they passed on Lamar. Aaron Rodgers, oh my God, they passed on Aaron Rodgers. They were 25 and 23, I think, respectively, Lamar, Aaron. So like, the 1st round is where you find your guy. And so Carr is still very good. And if Sam Howell could play at a level that Derek Carr could this upcoming season, that would be incredible. That said, what's the downside? And if you put it that way, it's like, well, shoot, forget everything we just said about everybody else in this podcast. Go get the guy. But the problem is we can't dismiss that. And the question that they've got to answer, and why ultimately I would still lean towards Howell and a Dalton, a Brissett, whoever is the backup, is you can kiss Reeves goodbye. You can kiss, and it's
Payne,
the same. Probably Payne goodbye. Like
Curl,
you kiss
all those
Curl,
guys.
the ability to extend Cam, so he's pissed off the whole year, then probably leaves next year. Like all that stuff is off the table because you've done what you did last year, and that was the problem last year. Was they gave up so much for Wentz? Is they lost their depth on the defensive line? They lost a couple of other guys. And who knows what the counterfactual is in terms of who they could have signed, who they never even looked at because they decided to spend $28 million on Carson Wentz instead of just running it back with Taylor Heineke.
And the crazy thing about that Carson Wentz thing, I know if people hear $28 million and they lose their mind, is that's like a deal. That's a deal for a guy that you think is a starting caliber quarterback, right? So it's not as prohibitive as this Derek Carr thing's going to be. Like, he is looking to make a lot of money, and someone's going to pay him a lot of money. Like, a lot of money. And so that's why I said if it's $30 to $35 million, you probably take a look at it. You have the conversation. I don't think that's even on the table. I think he's going, I want $40 to $45 million, and this is what the deal is. And it's going to be a 4 or 5 year deal. You're going to be hampered for a while. So think about that. Even if he goes from 40 to 45, that's $5 million a year you lose to re-sign players. Think about Cam Curl's potential salary as being $5 million a year. You lose that just from there. You know what I'm saying? Right. And then that's not even talking about the bigger numbers with Payne, extending Montez. So that's where it becomes prohibitive. And again, we've talked about Philadelphia a lot on this podcast. But one of the things that I really admire about them is they said, let's hold up. We've got a guy we think can do it, right? In Jalen Hurts. They built around him. The roster was completely ready, like totally ready, no doubt about it. And then they said, we'll give him a year. If it works, great. If it doesn't, this is the year. They have 2 first-round picks. They could trade up and get whoever they want. So I think that is something that I've always been an advocate of drafting a rookie quarterback, even a later round quarterback, even like the Brock Purdy's of the world, right? I think there's value there because it lets you build and cultivate this roster of tremendous playmakers. Like San Francisco is a fantastic example. Everyone's like, oh, they gave up all this draft capital for Lance, and they brought in Purdy, and they have Garoppolo. Lance is like not even a factor in terms of their salary cap. He takes up like less than a percentage point, right? So they can go out and sign Kittle, sign Trent Williams, the middle linebacker Warner. They can extend those guys, and Jimmy Garoppolo is at a very reasonable number as well. So that is, to me, what you're getting. That's a perfect example. I think Lance is at like probably $5.5 million a year because of how the contract is structured, maybe $7 million in terms of cap hit. But Jimmy Garoppolo is at 28. So the two of those guys together are less than what Derek Carr would be here in Washington, right? Just to give you some perspective on what that number is. And because they were sound in their process with good deals with quarterbacks, they're able to build this roster out. So I think that's ultimately what I settle on is like, is this roster ready to win a Super Bowl? The roster. And the answer I would say is probably not. And so the number one thing that's prohibitive to that is going out and paying a quarterback a lot of money. If you look at the quarterbacks who win Super Bowls, they are consistently, I think it's less than 5% of the total salary cap. It's rookies, like just go back through every Super Bowl. It's even Patrick Mahomes under his new deal is less than 5% of the total salary cap. Like that is what you're looking for. And Derek Carr is immediately prohibitive to that. Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers, whoever it is. And it just prevents you from adding the offensive lineman you need.
Yeah, I was about to say that. The fact that we mentioned all those different things that it would prevent, bolstering the O-line is the most important. Right. And you kiss that goodbye. Unless you hit on every draft pick. Which is tough. Those guys are ready to play immediately, which we talked about in the last pod. O-line sometimes takes a hot second.
Yeah. And so I think that, to me, when I look at what Derek Carr does, if he's looking for the number that I think he's looking for, which all reports seem to be like, yes, that's just not going to work for this team. And I think Ron and Marty and everybody's aware of that.
Yeah, if it's 15, great. If it's over that, I just think it'd give up too much.
Even if it's 30, it's fine. But it's not going to be 30, which is the
See, I don't even think I'd want to spend 30. Like to me, you're then restricting. Yeah, which again, like I'm giving up hope. I just think it's good perspective to get out of the Sam Howell hype bubble and be like, hey, who's better, Howell or Carr? Derek Carr is better at this point. Would be very surprising if he's not better. I'm not ruling it out because I don't want people to
Way to
clip this
hedge.
next fall if Howell turns out to be amazing and Carr actually has hit a wall and stinks. But the odds are Derek Carr is better than Sam Howell. The question that you have to ask, though, when you build a team is who is the better value? And Sam Howell, I think, is a significantly better value than Derek Carr, who you might get $25 million worth of play out of, but if that $25 million costs you $30 or $40 million, I'd rather get $2 million of quarterback play out of $800,000 of Sam Howell.
That's an excellent way to word it. I love how you said that. It's 25
if only they
million.
had listened to me when I said that about Carson Wentz last year.
Yeah, it's $25 million bucks of quarterback pay, but you're paying $30 million or $40 million for it. Like, that's exactly what you're looking for, right? It's his cost has superseded the value he brings to the roster, and it becomes prohibitive at some point.
All right, this was fun. Keep your mailbag questions coming always. You never know when we're going to do one, except for when we tell you we are, and then
we don't do it.
And then we're like, okay, hey, bring on the questions. And sometimes we have overflow, and that's what today's pod was. Coming up next week, we will get you ready for the NFL Combine. Logan and I will both be going to Indianapolis in 2 weeks, which is very exciting. So we might even do a pod while we are there. And then other than that, we await the OC news, which frankly might happen before you listen to this podcast, depending on when you listen. Bieniemy is interviewing on Wednesday, so that is exciting. Or maybe he's interviewing on Thursday. The interview is set. I got to double check on when it is, but Bieniemy is interviewing. Roman interviewed on Tuesday. Ron Rivera told a couple of people last week when he did the rounds of interviews, he was hoping to have it done by the end of this week, but early next week was also a distinct possibility as he goes through all of his notes from at this point, it'll be 8 or 9 guys that he's interviewed. So we will, whoever it is, we will do a more in-depth breakdown on the tape and what their offense might look like, and we'll go from there on that. Get you ready for the Combine. That's all coming on Take Command. For Logan, I'm Craig. We'll see you next time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching right now, and we will see you next week. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.